In this video, we are going to be breaking down SpongeBob New Year lore through an adult lens. Let's get started with the calendar that never moves. You remember watching SpongeBob on Saturday mornings, sitting too close to the TV, cereal going soft in the bowl, the world outside not asking anything from you yet. Bikini Bottom felt timeless back then, and that feeling was comforting. But when you come back as an adult, something about that timelessness starts to feel different. He never gets older. None of them do. SpongeBob flips Krabby Patties with the same energy year after year. Squidward stays stuck in the same apartment, the same job, the same quiet disappointment. Patrick remains exactly where he is, mentally and emotionally. Nothing accumulates, nothing resolves. And yet, somehow, they celebrate New Year's. That's where the contradiction quietly begins. New Year is supposed to mark progression. It only makes sense if time leaves something behind. A year has to age before a new one can replace it. But in Bikini Bottom, nothing ever becomes old. Not the characters, not their relationships, not their mistakes. The past does not weigh anything down. It just resets, clean and untouched, like a VHS tape being rewound to the same scene again and again. So, what exactly is advancing here? When SpongeBob throws on a party hat and blows a noisemaker, it looks cheerful on the surface. But when you slow it down and really think about it, it starts to feel like a ritual without substance, a celebration without evidence. It is the performance of change in a world that refuses to allow it. That kind of contradiction creates cognitive dissonance, even if the show never names it. Your brain senses it anyway. Something is being marked that does not exist. Time in Bikini Bottom does not move forward the way time moves in your life. There are no seasons, no visible decay, no milestones that stick. If a mistake happens, it does not echo. If someone suffers, it does not alter the future. That is not freedom. That is stasis. And stasis dressed up as celebration starts to resemble negligence, not joy. This is where the adult lens makes things uncomfortable. Either time is actually passing in Bikini Bottom or it is not. Both cannot exist in the same reality. If time is passing, then something is wrong with the characters, because they're trapped in an endless failure to grow. But if time is not passing, then the new year itself is a lie, a symbolic gesture meant to soothe rather than signify. Either way, the celebration becomes hollow. You can feel how gently the show avoids addressing this. It never stops to explain. It just repeats the ritual. Countdown, noise, smiles, reset. The repetition itself becomes the point. The ritual replaces meaning. That is why it feels familiar as an adult who has lived through corporate calendars and forced optimism. End of year emails, new goals, same workload, same stress, same loop. The new year in Bikini Bottom is not about hope. It is about maintenance. Keeping everything exactly where it is while pretending something is turned over. That pretense is soft, almost kind. It does not shout, it does not demand belief, it just keeps going quietly year after year, asking you not to look too closely. Because you can't celebrate a new year if nothing ever becomes old, the only thing left to celebrate is the act itself. That is where Bikini Bottom quietly shifts from emotion into procedure. The new year does not arrive with reflection or consequence. It arrives with steps. Put on the hat, blow the noisemaker, count down from a number everyone already knows by heart, smile at the right moment, then reset. It is not a feeling, it is a process. And processes do not care whether they mean anything as long as they are followed correctly. You start to notice how empty the ritual really is when you slow it down. Nothing is resolved by midnight. No tension dissolves. SpongeBob is still working the same job. Squidward is still trapped next door. Mr. Krabs is still extracting value from the same labor. The noise fades and the system snaps back into place like it was never disturbed. The ritual does not interrupt the loop. It protects it. This is what ritual looks like when it has been separated from purpose. It becomes repetition without outcome, motion without direction. The same gestures recycled until they feel natural, even comforting. That comfort is the danger, because when something feels familiar enough, you stop asking what it is for. You just do it. That is how maintenance disguises itself as celebration. As a kid, you probably did not question this. You just accepted that New Year meant fun noises and bright colors. But as an adult, your brain recognizes the pattern. This is the same energy as corporate countdowns, quarterly resets, motivational speeches that promise change without altering a single condition. The calendar flips, the workload stays, the anxiety stays. The ritual becomes a way to release pressure without fixing the system that caused it. Bikini Bottom does the same thing. The celebration functions like a pressure valve. It gives everyone permission to pretend that something has shifted just enough to keep them compliant. The ritual absorbs dissatisfaction. It reframes stagnation as tradition. And once stagnation has a tradition, it stops feeling like a problem. It starts feeling normal. Listen to how simple the ritual is. Noisemakers, hats, counting, smiling. That simplicity is intentional. It lowers cognitive effort. It makes participation easy. You do not need to believe in change, you only need to perform it. That is how systems avoid rebellion. They replace meaning with routine. They turn engagement into muscle memory. There is something deeply unsettling about how calm this is. No one in Bikini Bottom seems confused by it. No one asks what exactly they are welcoming in. The new year arrives like a scheduled update that installs nothing. But everyone goes along with it because everyone always has. That is how rituals survive even when their original purpose is gone. This is where adult anxiety creeps in, because you recognize this pattern in your own life. The meetings, the milestones, the countdowns that promise relief but only deliver a brief pause. The world tells you to celebrate progress while quietly preventing it. Over time, that creates burnout. Not loud burnout, quiet burnout. The kind where you are tired but still smiling, still showing up, still blowing the noisemaker when it is time. In Bikini Bottom, repetition is not a flaw. It is the design. The ritual does not exist to change anything. It exists to make sure nothing has to. And that is when the new year stops feeling like a celebration and starts feeling like maintenance. And that is when the new year stops feeling like a celebration and starts feeling like maintenance. Because SpongeBob is always ready to maintain the mood. His excitement never wavers. Not at midnight, not the next morning, not the year after that. SpongeBob does not adjust his optimism based on evidence. He does not slow it down. He does not question it. His happiness arrives preloaded, like a default setting that never checks for updates. And at first, that feels comforting. Familiar, safe. He is the character who promises that everything is fine, even when nothing has changed. But when you watch it as an adult, that constant enthusiasm starts to feel less like joy and more like enforcement. SpongeBob does not just feel happy, he performs happiness. Loudly, publicly, repeatedly. His excitement fills the space so completely that there is no room left for doubt, frustration, or reflection. That is not balance. That is control through positivity. This is where optimism quietly becomes something else. When happiness cannot respond to reality, it stops being emotional intelligence. It becomes denial. SpongeBob does not ask whether the new year actually brings improvement. He does not pause to notice that his life resets back to the same conditions every time. He celebrates anyway, and by doing that, he teaches everyone else how they are supposed to react. Optimism turns into habit here. Habit turns into reflex. Reflex turns into identity. SpongeBob is not choosing to be happy anymore. He is obligated to be. His role in the system depends on it. The moment he stops smiling, the illusion weakens. The loop becomes visible, so the smile stays in place, no matter what the evidence says. This is not malicious. That is what makes it unsettling. SpongeBob is not lying. He genuinely believes in the celebration, but belief without flexibility becomes a form of gaslighting, even when it is unintentional. When someone insists that everything is great while ignoring obvious stagnation, it creates cognitive dissonance for everyone around them. Squidward feels it, you feel it. The discomfort does not come from cruelty, it comes from misalignment. Think about how often you have experienced this in real life. Workplace culture that demands positivity during layoffs, social pressure to celebrate milestones you are not ready for, the expectation to smile through burnout because negativity makes the others uncomfortable. SpongeBob embodies that pressure perfectly. He absorbs it, he radiates it, he normalizes it. His New Year enthusiasm functions like emotional insulation. It keeps the system warm enough that cracks do not form. If someone feels disappointed, SpongeBob smooths it over with cheer. If someone feels stuck, SpongeBob reframes it as excitement. This is not healing, it is containment. Pain does not disappear. It just stops being acknowledged. What makes this effective is how gentle it feels. SpongeBob never raises his voice. He never demands compliance outright. He simply models the correct emotional response so consistently that deviation starts to feel wrong. That is how enforced positivity works. It does not punish sadness directly. It makes sadness feel unnecessary, even inappropriate. As a kid, you probably saw SpongeBob as aspirational. As an adult, you recognize the cost. Living in a constant state of excitement requires suppressing reality. It requires ignoring patterns. It requires pretending that repetition is renewal. Over time, that creates emotional exhaustion, not relief. SpongeBob's optimism is not adaptive. It does not learn. It does not evolve. It loops. And in a world that never progresses, looping happiness becomes the most efficient way to keep everything exactly where it is. Because when happiness never reacts to reality, it stops being happiness, and that is exactly why Squidward reacts the way he does. He is not shocked by the new year. He is not confused by it. He is not even truly offended. What he feels is something quieter and heavier. Squidward has seen this moment too many times. The hats, the noise, the countdown that promises movement and delivers nothing. For him, the new year does not arrive with excitement. It arrives like deja vu, like waking up to the same alarm in the same room after a night that never really ended. This is not bitterness. This is temporal exhaustion. Squidward understands something the others either cannot see or refuse to acknowledge. He knows that nothing will be different tomorrow. He knows that the celebration is a loop, not a turning point. That awareness does not make him smarter in a rewarding way. It makes him tired. Awareness in a system that cannot change becomes a burden rather than a gift. Every noise feels louder to him because it has already happened. Every cheer feels hollow because it echoes previous cheers that led nowhere. The new year does not offer Squidward hope. It offers repetition. And repetition without progress slowly drains meaning out of everything it touches. Think about how that feels as an adult. You recognize the calendar event. You know what you are supposed to feel, but your body does not respond. Not because you are broken, but because you have learned the pattern. You know the reset will not address the underlying conditions. You know the same expectations will be waiting in the morning. Squidward lives inside that realization permanently. He is emotionally stranded because he cannot unsee it. SpongeBob's optimism does not comfort him. It isolates him. The louder the celebration becomes, the more disconnected Squidward feels from it. That is how forced positivity works on the aware. It does not lift them up. It pushes them further out. Squidward is not angry that the new year exists. He is exhausted that it keeps arriving without permission. That exhaustion shows up as irritation, because irritation is easier to tolerate than despair. If he admitted how draining it really is, the weight might become unbearable. So he sighs, he withdraws, he distances himself from the ritual entirely. This is where the adult lens reframes his personality. Squidward is not a killjoy. He is the only one responding proportionally to the situation. He is reacting to stagnation with fatigue instead of denial. That makes him incompatible with a system that survives on cheerful repetition. Awareness creates friction here. Either Squidward accepts the ritual and lies to himself, or he remains honest and suffers socially. There is no third option. Either he joins the performance, or he becomes a problem. Both choices cost him something. That is the logic trap he lives in every year. You can feel how alone that makes him. Everyone else moves in rhythm with the celebration. Squidward, Frout, stands slightly out of sync, not because he wants to, but because he cannot force himself to believe in it anymore. That dissonance is painful. It is the pain of seeing through something you know you're still expected to participate in. This is why his exhaustion feels familiar. It mirrors the quiet fatigue of adults who have outgrown certain rituals but are still required to perform them. The meetings, the milestones, the countdowns that feel more like obligations than markers of change. Squidward carries that weight constantly. He isn't angry that it's happening again. He's tired that it always does, and that tiredness is where the loop quietly closes. Because when you step back and look at everything together, the pattern becomes almost gentle. A new year arrives, the noise happens, the countdown reaches zero, and then nothing moves. Not really. The streets of Bikini Bottom look the same. The routines restart. The emotional positions lock back into place. SpongeBob stays cheerful. Squidward stays aware. The system breathes out and settles. This is the paradox the chapter began with, returning now in its simplest form. New Year exists. Time does not. Or at least time does not behave the way it is supposed to. It does not carry weight forward. It does not stack consequences. It does not demand growth. It just circles. Quietly. Reliably. There is something soothing about how predictable it is. That is important. The show does not frame this as a crisis. It frames it as normal. The lack of progression is never announced. It is simply lived in. Over time, that absence of change stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like a rule. The loop becomes an environment. As an adult, you recognize that feeling. The way days blur together, the way years pass without clear markers, the way rituals step in to replace real movement. Holidays, countdowns, milestones that sound important but do not actually shift anything underneath. Bikini Bottom mirrors that experience perfectly without ever saying it out loud. This is why the repetition feels calming instead of alarming. Nothing unexpected is coming. Nothing will demand adaptation. The same patterns will repeat, and that predictability reduces anxiety. Even Squidward's exhaustion becomes part of the rhythm. Even SpongeBob's optimism becomes background noise. Everything finds its place inside the loop. The language slows here because the ideas no longer need to be proven. They only need to be felt. New year, same jobs, same relationships, same emotional distances. The reset does not fail. It does exactly what it is designed to do. It keeps everything from changing. And there is comfort in that. Even if it is hollow, when nothing moves forward, nothing can be lost. When nothing accumulates, nothing becomes heavy. The system trades growth for stability and stability for quiet. That trade is never discussed. It is simply accepted. You do not need to solve this contradiction. The show never asks you to. It just lets you sit inside it. The calendar flips, the world remains still. The loop tightens, not aggressively, but softly, like a familiar routine at the end of a long day. So the year turns over. The noise fades, the celebration dissolves back into habit, and everything stays exactly where it was, including what they remember. Because memory does exist in Bikini Bottom, that part is important. This is not a place where events vanish completely. Characters remember being hurt, they remember being embarrassed, they remember failing. SpongeBob remembers rejection. Squidward remembers disappointment. Mr. Krabs remembers loss when it affects profit. The past is not erased, it is stored, but it is never integrated. That is the distinction that matters here. Remembering is not the same thing as learning. Memory on its own is just data. Integration is what turns experience into change, and Bikini Bottom quietly refuses that second step. The memories stay isolated. They do not alter behavior, they do not reshape choices, they do not influence the next cycle. You can feel how strange that is when you slow down and sit with it. A character goes through something painful and the show acknowledges it. The emotion is real in the moment. But when the next episode arrives, the memory has no leverage. It carries no weight. It is like recalling a dream that never quite connects to waking life. This is where the psychological reset becomes visible. The system allows memory because memory alone is harmless. Memory without accumulation cannot threaten structure. It cannot demand accountability. It cannot force growth. It just exists, compartmentalized, sealed off from impact. As an adult, this pattern feels uncomfortably familiar. You remember burnout, you remember being overwhelmed, you remember promises you made to yourself during hard moments. But when the calendar flips, the conditions remain the same, and those memories sit quietly in the background, unable to influence the present. That creates emotional stagnation, not because you forgot, but because nothing around you allowed the memory to matter. In Bikini Bottom, pain is acknowledged but neutralized. It is felt, then dissolved. Not healed, not resolved, just reset. That is not resilience. That is containment. The system absorbs discomfort without changing the structure that caused it. Over time, that trains everyone inside it to expect repetition rather than improvement. This is why the New Year reset works so well here. It does not promise growth, it promises relief. Relief from holding the past too tightly. Relief from letting experience demand change. The reset gently tells the characters and the audience that remembering is enough. Integration is optional. But integration is where growth lives. Without it, memory becomes a loop instead of a lesson. The same mistakes recur. The same dynamics persist. The same emotional wounds reopen without ever closing. That is not because the characters are incapable. It is because the system does not permit accumulation. Think about how soothing that can feel in the short term. If nothing accumulates, nothing becomes overwhelming. No burden grows too heavy, but in the long term, it creates a strange kind of paralysis. Life keeps happening, but nothing moves forward. You stay busy, but unchanged. This is why the tone here remains compassionate. This is not a failure of character, it is a condition. Bikini Bottom is built to remember without evolving. It stores experiences the way a hard drive stores files it never opens. Present, intact, untouched. And that is the quiet tragedy of it. Memory exists, pain exists, awareness exists, but progress does not. The reset comes in gently, like a lullaby, telling everyone that it's okay not to carry anything forward. They remember what happened, but it never changes what happens next, because the reset is not designed to teach anything. It is designed to soothe. The new year in Bikini Bottom works less like a solution and more like a sedative. Nothing is repaired, nothing is confronted. The sharp edges are simply dulled for a moment. The discomfort fades just enough to make it tolerable, and that is all the system requires. Pain does not have to disappear, it only has to quiet down. You can hear it in the rhythm of the celebration. The countdown slows everything. The noise peaks, the moment passes. And then there is a calm. Not the calm that comes from resolution, but the calm that comes from emotional numbness. The problem is still there. It just does not hurt as loudly anymore. This is how psychological sedation works. It does not remove the cause of distress. It interrupts the signal. It lowers awareness. It tells the nervous system that it can rest, even though nothing has actually changed. The body relaxes, the mind exhales, and the cycle is allowed to continue. In Bikini Bottom, the reset functions exactly this way. The characters do not grow because growth would require discomfort to stay present long enough to demand change. Instead, the reset steps in right on time. Just as frustration might accumulate, just as awareness might sharpen, the ritual arrives and smooths everything out. Relief replaces resolution. This feels familiar because you live inside versions of this every day. Scrolling to avoid thinking, noise to drown out anxiety, distractions that promise rest but never deliver repair. The system does not want you healed. It wants you calm enough to keep going. Bikini Bottom understands that instinct perfectly. The new year does not tell the characters that their problems are gone. It simply asks them not to focus on them. The lights are bright, the sounds are loud, the moment is full, there is no space left for reflection. That absence of space is the point. Listen to how simple the reset is. Count, cheer, reset. No analysis required. No emotional processing needed. Everything becomes manageable because nothing is examined. That simplicity is not accidental. It is how sedation stays effective. Complexity wakes people up. Simplicity lets them rest without asking questions. Over time, this creates dependency. The characters begin to rely on the reset the way someone relies on a numbing routine. When things feel heavy, they wait for the ritual. When disappointment surfaces, they trust the cycle to smooth it out. The idea of actually confronting the source becomes unnecessary, even threatening. This is where the system quietly wins. Pain is allowed to exist, but only briefly, long enough to be acknowledged, not long enough to be integrated. The reset arrives before discomfort can turn into action. That timing is everything. You can feel how gentle this is. Nothing is forced. No one is punished. The sedation is offered, not imposed. And because it feels kind, it is accepted. The characters relax into it. The audience relaxes into it. The loop tightens, not through fear, but through comfort. This is why the reset is so effective. It does not deny pain outright. It reframes it as temporary, manageable, something that will pass on its own. And when pain is framed that way, there is no urgency to address it. Waiting becomes a solution. But waiting is not healing. The new year in Bikini Bottom does not end suffering. It pauses it. It lowers the volume. It tells everyone that they can rest now, even though the cause is still sitting right where it was before the countdown started. And that is the quiet truth underneath the celebration. It doesn't fix the pain, it just asks you not to feel it, and SpongeBob is the one who makes that possible. He does not remove the problem from the environment. He catches it before it spreads. SpongeBob functions like emotional insulation, absorbing impact so the structure around him does not have to bend. When tension appears, it hits him first. When disappointment surfaces, it lands on his smile. When failure threatens to linger, he reframes it before it can settle. This is not innocence, this is function. SpongeBob's cheerfulness works the way a shock absorber works on a car. The road is still uneven. The damage still exists, but the ride feels smoother, so no one complains. He softens every emotional bump just enough that the system never has to stop and examine the road itself. Watch how quickly he reacts when something goes wrong. He laughs, he reframes, he reassures. He does not allow discomfort to idle in the space between people. That space is dangerous. That is where awareness forms. So SpongeBob fills it immediately, with enthusiasm, with noise, with optimism that never pauses long enough to ask why. This is why his happiness feels tireless. It has to be. If SpongeBob ever slowed down, if he ever sat quietly with frustration instead of converting it into cheer, the system would feel the full weight of what it has been avoiding. The sadness would spread. The stagnation would become undeniable. The loop would weaken. So he absorbs it. This is not framed as sacrifice in the show. It is framed as personality. That is how the role stays invisible. SpongeBob does not say he is carrying emotional weight for everyone else. He just does it. And because he does it happily, no one questioned the cost. As an adult, you recognize this pattern instantly. The coworker who keeps morale up while being overworked, the friend who jokes through burnout, the person who absorbs tension so the group does not have to sit with it. They are praised for their positivity. Rarely are they asked how heavy it feels. SpongeBob keeps his system intact by preventing rupture. He does not allow cracks to deepen. When Squidward shows fatigue, SpongeBob covers it with excitement. When work becomes exploitative, SpongeBob reframes it as fun. When the new year promises change and delivers nothing, SpongeBob celebrates anyway, filling the gap where disappointment might have grown. This does not make him evil, it makes him essential. Systems like Bikini Bottom require someone like him, someone who converts discomfort into energy, someone who keeps the rhythm going when it should slow down, someone who turns pressure into performance. That is why the reset depends on him. The ritual would not work without an emotional conduit. SpongeBob takes in the unresolved feelings and releases them as noise, color, and cheer. The system breathes easier because of him. But absorption is not resolution. When pain is constantly absorbed, it never disappears. It accumulates quietly in the person doing the absorbing. The show never explores this directly, but the implication sits there. SpongeBob is endlessly available, endlessly cheerful, endlessly ready to take the hit. That is how you know this is a role, not a mood. He does not solve problems. He does not change conditions. He does not demand growth. He absorbs what would otherwise force the system to confront itself. And because he does it so gently, so joyfully, it feels harmless. That is the genius of it. The world stays the same. The loop remains stable, the reset works, and SpongeBob keeps smiling, catching everything before it can break anything else. He doesn't solve problems. He absorbs them, and that leaves someone else to carry what cannot be absorbed. That someone is Squidward. His suffering is not caused by cruelty or bad luck. It comes from awareness that has nowhere to go. Squidward sees the reset before it happens. He knows the celebration will not change anything. He knows the noise will fade and the same routine will return. That knowledge does not empower him. It exhausts him. Awareness is usually framed as strength. In most stories, seeing the truth gives a character leverage. In Bikini Bottom, it does the opposite. Awareness becomes a liability because the system is designed for repetition, not reflection. Knowing too much only makes the loop harder to endure. Squidward cannot unsee the pattern. He watches the ritual approach like a wave he has already been hit by dozens of times. The countdown does not build anticipation for him. It builds fatigue. Every cheer reminds him of the cheers that came before and the nothing that followed them. This is not anger. Anger would require the belief that something could change if enough force were applied. Squidward has moved past that stage. What he feels is the heaviness of knowing without agency. He understands the mechanism, but he cannot stop it. He understands the lie, but he cannot opt out without consequence. That kind of awareness is draining. It forces you to participate in something you no longer believe in. It makes every repetition feel longer than the last. Over time, the emotional cost compounds even if nothing else does. As an adult, you recognize this immediately. You see patterns in work culture, in social expectations, in systems that repeat themselves regardless of effort. You know the meeting will not fix the issue. You know the milestone will not reduce the workload, but you still have to attend, still have to smile, still have to act like the reset matters. Squidward lives in that space permanently. His awareness does not grant him escape. It traps him inside the loop more tightly than anyone else. SpongeBob can lean into optimism and float. Squidward sinks under the weight of seeing clearly. The system subtly punishes this kind of perception, not through direct force, but through isolation. When Squidward expresses his exhaustion, he is framed as negative. When he withdraws, he is framed as difficult. His awareness becomes a social flaw rather than a signal that something is wrong. This is how repetition defends itself. It reframes discomfort as personal failure. If you are tired, you are the problem. If you question the ritual, you are out of sync. That pressure encourages silence, not change. Squidward adapts to this by disengaging. He lowers his expectations. He dulls his responses. He conserves energy. That looks like apathy from the outside, but it is actually self-preservation. Caring too much in a static system only accelerates burnout. This is a tragedy of chronic awareness. It does not create revolution. it creates fatigue. The mind stays awake, but the body grows heavy. The desire to fight gives way to the need to endure. Squidward is not failing to adapt. He is adapting too well. He has learned exactly how little his awareness can do, and that knowledge weighs on him every time the calendar pretends to turn, which is how the second loop quietly settles into place. Because when you gather everything together, it forms a pattern that no longer asks to be solved. Memory exists, pain exists, awareness exists, but change does not. The system allows each part to be present, just never at the same time in a way that could matter. Memory is stored without influence. Pain is felt without duration. Awareness is acknowledged without agency. Each element is isolated, softened, and returned to its place. This is the rhythm of the reset. Memory surfaces, then fades, pain appears, then quiets. Awareness flickers, then grows tired. Nothing is erased, but nothing is allowed to accumulate. The cycle keeps moving by making sure nothing ever gets heavy enough to slow it down. You can feel how intentional that design is. Sedation smooths the edges so discomfort never sharpens into action. SpongeBob absorbs what would otherwise spread. Squidward carries what cannot be absorbed. And the new year arrives on schedule to lower the volume on everything at once. The loop does not break, it breathes. This is not chaos, it is regulation. The system does not deny reality, it dilutes it, just enough that it can be tolerated, just enough that no one has to confront the source. Over time, that dilution becomes familiar. Familiar becomes comfortable. Comfortable becomes normal, and normal stops asking questions. As an adult, you know this feeling well. The way routines replace progress, the way exhaustion is managed instead of resolved, the way awareness becomes something you learn to live with rather than act on. The world does not demand that you stop seeing, it just asks you not to do anything with what you see. That is the quiet genius of the loop. It does not fight resistance, it outlasts it. Every time frustration rises, the reset arrives. Every time memory threatens to connect to consequence, sedation steps in. Every time awareness becomes too sharp, isolation dulls it. The cycle completes itself without force. Listen to how soft this is. Nothing crashes. Nothing collapses. There is no dramatic failure. The system simply returns to baseline. Again and again and again. That repetition is not an accident. It is what makes the loop feel safe. The language slows here because there is nothing left to prove. The ideas no longer need explanation. They only need repetition. Memory exists, pain exists, awareness exists, change does not. The words circle back on themselves the same way the calendar does. The repetition lowers effort. The meaning settles. This is where thinking starts to feel unnecessary. The loop does not need your attention to function. It has already accounted for it. Whether you analyze it or not, the reset will still arrive. The celebration will still happen. The quiet will still return. And that is where the comfort lives. In knowing what comes next. In knowing that nothing will escalate. In knowing that the system is stable even if it is stagnant. Stability becomes the reward. Quiet becomes the outcome. The year turns. The noise fades. Memory softens. Awareness grows tired. Pain lowers its voice. The loop closes itself gently without asking for permission. And every year, it all becomes quiet again, which is exactly why the promise sounds so strange when it finally arrives. Because a promise assumes a future that is different from the present. It assumes distance. It assumes movement. When you say you will be better next year, you are imagining a version of yourself that does not yet exist. That imagination is the foundation of every resolution. But in Bikini Bottom, that foundation quietly collapses. Tomorrow looks exactly like today. The streets will be the same. The jobs will be the same. The emotional positions will be the same. SpongeBob will still be smiling behind the counter. Squidward will still be counting the hours. Mr. Krabs will still be measuring everything in profit. Nothing about the environment allows for transformation, so the promise floats without anything to land on. This is what makes New Year resolutions feel hollow here. They are spoken into a system that does not permit follow through. The words exist. The intention exists, but the structure does not change to support them. A promise without structural support is not motivation. It is fantasy. You can feel how gently the show avoids acknowledging this. Characters might talk about doing better, trying harder, changing something small, but the world around them remains frozen. There is no space for distance from the present. There is no path forward. The promise becomes ceremonial rather than practical. This mirrors the exhaustion you feel as an adult when self-improvement culture keeps asking for change without altering conditions. Be more productive, be happier, be healthier. but keep the same workload, the same stress, the same expectations. The promise is framed as personal responsibility, even when the environment makes fulfillment impossible. In Bikini Bottom, this logic trap is complete. Either the characters are failing to keep their promises, or the system never intended those promises to be kept. Both cannot be true at the same time. If better never arrives, then promising better becomes an act of performance rather than intention. That performance is comforting at first, it feels hopeful, it feels proactive. Saying the promise gives a momentary sense of control. But control without capacity turns into frustration. Over time, repeated broken promises erode trust, not just in the system, but in the self. This is why the tone here stays soft. The problem is not laziness. It is not lack of willpower. It is misalignment. The promise asks for growth. The system enforces stasis. That contradiction quietly drains energy year after year. You recognize this feeling. The way resolutions start strong and fade quickly, not because you did not care, but because nothing around you shifted to support them. The calendar changed, the conditions did not. Eventually, making promises starts to feel pointless, even embarrassing. In Bikini Bottom, the promise survives only as ritual. It is said because it is expected. It is part of the New Year script. No one pauses to ask whether it makes sense. That pause would require acknowledging that the future here is not open. It is pre-written. This is why the idea of improvement feels so distant in this world. There is no next version waiting. There is only repetition. The promise cannot be fulfilled because fulfillment requires time to carry change forward, and time here refuses to do that work. So the promise becomes symbolic, a way to mark the moment without committing to the outcome. It soothes the anxiety of stagnation without challenging it. The words sound hopeful, even as they dissolve on contact with reality. You can feel the weight lift slightly when you realize this. The failure was never personal. The promise was never realistic. The system was never built for better to arrive. You can't promise to be better if better never arrives, and nowhere is that clearer than in the way Mr. Krabs responds to the new year. He acknowledges it. That part matters. He says the words. He recognizes the date. He might even pretend to celebrate, but nothing about the contract changes. The hours remain the same. The expectations remain the same. The pay remains exactly where it was. The new year passes through the Krusty Krab like a memo instead of a moment. This is not an oversight. It is a method. Mr. Krabs understands ritual better than anyone else in Bikini Bottom. He knows the power of symbolic recognition. If you acknowledge the milestone out loud, you can avoid renegotiating anything underneath it. The language does the work. The system stays intact. Watch how clean this exchange is. There is no argument, no confrontation. SpongeBob does not demand improvement. Squidward does not expect it. The new year is treated as a surface level acknowledgement rather than a structural checkpoint. Everyone hears the words. No one receives the change. This is what transactional ritual looks like. It borrows the emotional weight of renewal without paying the cost. Mr. Krabs speaks as if something has turned over, while ensuring that nothing actually has. That balance is intentional. It keeps morale just high enough to avoid resistance. As an adult, this pattern feels painfully familiar. End of year speeches about appreciation, emails thanking employees for their hard work, promises of exciting things ahead. And then January arrives and the workload is heavier than before. The language shifts. The conditions do not. In Bikini Bottom, the new year becomes another tool of leverage, not through force, but through framing. If the year has changed, then expectations can quietly reset without improving. Workers are asked to bring fresh energy into the same constraints. The reset benefits the system, not the people inside it. Mr. Krabs never says no to improvement. He simply never provides the environment for it. That is the key distinction. Exploitation here is not loud. It is procedural. It hides behind tradition. It wears a party hat and keeps the ledger exactly the same. There is something almost soothing about how predictable this is. No false hope is created beyond the ritual itself. The promise is vague. The acknowledgement is brief. And then business continues. The loop does not stutter. This is why the tone stays calm. Mr. Krabs is not an exception. He is an expression of the system. He uses the new year the way systems always do, as a marker that sounds meaningful but carries no obligation. The repetition matters here. Every year, the same words. Every year, the same outcome. Over time, that repetition trains everyone to lower their expectations. The celebration stops being about change and starts being about endurance. Just get through it. Just keep going. You can feel how this erodes motivation quietly, not through cruelty, but through sameness. When promises are made without follow through, people stop listening. They nod, they smile, they perform engagement, and then they return to the routine they never left. This is the social contract of Bikini Bottom: acknowledgement without adjustment, recognition without reward, renewal without revision. The new year exists as language, not leverage for the worker. And once you see that, the ritual loses its innocence. It becomes a maintenance tool, keeping labor steady while offering symbolic relief. The system thanks you, then asks you to keep doing exactly what you were doing before. The calendar flips, the words change, the hats come off, the lights dim, and everything underneath remains untouched. The language changes, the conditions don't, because Bikini Bottom itself is not designed to change at all. It is a closed system. That is the simplest way to understand it. No one truly leaves. No one meaningfully advances. No one renegotiates their role in a way that sticks. Jobs repeat. Relationships reset. Hierarchies remain exactly where they were placed, as if bolted into the ocean floor. At first glance, it looks flexible. Characters move around. Episodes explore different scenarios, but when you zoom out, everything returns to its assigned position. SpongeBob is always the worker. Squidward is always adjacent to escape but never reaching it. Mr. Krabs is always above negotiation. The environment allows motion, but not mobility. That distinction matters. Mobility would require the system to acknowledge progress, to recognize accumulation, to let experience change status. Bikini Bottom does not do that. It permits activity without advancement. That is how the loop stays intact. This is why the new year feels so hollow here. A closed system cannot support a future that is different from its present. It can only recycle the same roles under a different date. The calendar flips, but the structure does not. Listen to how gently this is enforced. No one is explicitly told they cannot leave. No one is openly denied growth. It simply never happens. Opportunities do not appear. Pathways do not open. The system does not argue. It just continues. That quiet persistence is what makes it effective. As an adult, you recognize this pattern immediately. Workplaces where promotions are theoretical, social structures where effort does not change outcome, systems that encourage movement but never permit escape. You stay busy, you stay tired, you stay exactly where you started. Bikini Bottom mirrors that experience perfectly. Characters are active enough to feel engaged, but constrained enough to remain predictable. That predictability is not a flaw, it is the goal. In a closed system, hope becomes unnecessary. Hope would imply that something could be different. Instead, the system relies on compliance, not forced compliance, comfortable compliance, the kind that comes from repetition becoming familiar. Over time, familiarity replaces resistance. When nothing ever changes, you stop expecting it to. Expectations lower, ambitions shrink. The loop tightens without needing to apply pressure. This is why Squidward's awareness is so painful. He sees the closure. He understands that the system is sealed. That knowledge does not give him an exit. It just makes the walls more visible. Uh, SpongeBob survives the closed system by embracing it. His optimism adapts perfectly to an environment with no forward motion. Squidward struggles because he still senses the absence of possibility. Mr. Krabs thrives because he benefits from stability. True. Everyone is behaving rationally within the same structure. That is the unsettling part. The problem is not individual failure, it is design. The system does exactly what it was built to do. It maintains itself. Relationships reset because change would destabilize hierarchy. Jobs repeat because advancement would disrupt balance. Nothing accumulates because accumulation would create leverage. The loop protects itself by remaining flat. The repetition in this world is not accidental. It is maintenance. Every reset reinforces the closure. Every new year confirms that nothing escapes the pattern. You feel the calm settle in when you accept this. Not because it is good, but because it is predictable. Closed systems offer certainty, even when they deny growth. That certainty can feel safer than the anxiety of possibility. This is where resistance fades. When escape feels impossible, endurance becomes a strategy. You stop looking for exits and start managing energy. You adapt. Bikini Bottom does not need hope to function. Hope would only create friction. What it needs is participation, quiet agreement. people staying in their lanes year after year, episode after episode. A closed system doesn't need hope, it needs compliance, and that compliance is easiest to secure when it looks like celebration. That is what the new year becomes in Bikini Bottom. Not a moment for negotiation, not a pause to reassess roles or conditions. It becomes a performance, a shared agreement to act as if something meaningful has shifted so no one has to ask whether it actually has. Everyone participates. That is important. The performance only works if it is collective. Hats go on, smiles appear, the countdown happens out loud. These are not spontaneous expressions of joy, they are signals. Signals that say, I am aligned, I am participating, I'm not going to disrupt the rhythm. Celebration replaces conversation. Instead of asking for change, the characters celebrate the idea of it. Instead of questioning their position, they mark time passing. The ritual fills the space where negotiation might have happened. Once that space is filled, there is no room left for demands. This is why the celebration feels so smooth. It requires very little emotional honesty. You do not need to explain what you want. You do not need to admit what is missing. You just need to perform happiness at the correct moment. The system accepts that performance as consent. As an adult, this feels familiar in a quiet, uncomfortable way. Office parties instead of raises, motivational slogans instead of structural support, team celebrations instead of conversations about workload. The energy is upbeat, the music is loud, the questions never get asked. In Bikini Bottom, the new year functions exactly like that. It is a symbolic agreement not to push, not to challenge, not to renegotiate. The celebration becomes proof that everything is acceptable as it is. No one says this out loud. That is the elegance of it. The performance communicates compliance without requiring confession. Everyone smiles, and the system interprets that smile as satisfaction. The repetition of this performance matters. Year after year, the same gestures train the characters to expect ritual instead of response. When something feels wrong, they wait for the celebration. When frustration builds, they trust a reset to smooth it out. The habit replaces the question. Over time, this creates emotional distance. You stop expecting the system to listen. You stop preparing arguments. You stop imagining alternatives. You learn the choreography instead. Where to stand, when to cheer, when to clap. The performance becomes second nature. This is why the new year is so important to a closed system. It provides a socially acceptable outlet that looks like hope without creating pressure. It releases tension while preserving structure. It rewards participation without granting leverage. You can feel how calming this is. There is no conflict, no confrontation. Everyone agrees to the same story for one night. Tomorrow can wait. Tomorrow will look like today anyway. The language simplifies here because it does not need complexity. Celebrate, smile, reset, repeat. The fewer words used, the less space there is for doubt. The performance becomes soothing because it removes responsibility from the individual. You are not required to want more. You are only required to participate. This is not cruelty, it is efficiency. The system does not silence people directly. It gives them something else to do, something louder, something brighter, something that feels positive enough to replace dissatisfaction. Celebration becomes a substitute for negotiation. And once celebration fills that role, asking for more starts to feel inappropriate, ungrateful, out of sync. The performance sets the emotional boundary, stay inside it, and everything runs smoothly. So, the new year arrives and everyone agrees, just for a moment, to act like something has changed. That agreement keeps the system stable. It keeps expectations low. It keeps the loop intact. They celebrate so they don't have to ask for more. And that is how the third loop finally settles into its rhythm. Because by now, the psychological reset and the social structure are no longer separate ideas. They have merged. The promise, the sedation, the repetition, the performance, all of it moves together like a single mechanism. The new year does not arrive to change anything. It arrives to synchronize everything back to baseline. The promise suggests movement. The system prevents it. The reset soothes the discomfort that contradiction creates. And the celebration covers what remains. Nothing clashes anymore. The parts fit. That is what makes the loop feel complete. Memory remembers just enough to feel real. Pain speaks just long enough to be acknowledged. Awareness flickers just enough to feel intelligent. And then the rhythm takes over. Reset, smile, resume. The cycle does not rush. It does not hesitate. It simply continues. You can feel how quiet this becomes when resistance fades. Once you stop expecting progress, repetition loses its sting. The system no longer needs to convince anyone. It only needs to repeat itself. Over time, repetition becomes reassurance. Predictability becomes comfort. As an adult, you recognize this moment, the point where ambition softens into endurance, where hope is replaced by routine, where the goal stops being change and becomes stability. Not because stability is fulfilling, but because it is manageable. Bikini Bottom reaches that state perfectly. The social contracts are understood, the limits are clear, the roles are fixed. Everyone knows what to expect, and expectation lowers effort. The loop becomes easy to live inside because it no longer asks you to imagine alternatives. This is why the language slows here. There is no urgency left. Nothing is escalating. Nothing is breaking. The system is not collapsing. It is resting inside its own repetition. The new year no longer feels significant because significance would require direction. Instead, it becomes a marker, a soft chime, a signal that the cycle is renewing itself exactly as designed. The calendar moves, but the environment does not respond. This is not dramatic, it is subtle. That subtlety is what allows it to persist. Loud systems attract resistance. Quiet systems blend into daily life. Bikini Bottom does not trap its residents with walls. It surrounds them with routine. You stop noticing the loop once you accept it. That acceptance feels like relief. No more disappointment. No more broken promises. No more waiting for something that never arrives. The rhythm takes care of everything. Promise becomes tradition. Tradition becomes habit. Habit becomes background noise. The reset is no longer something that happens, it is something that always is. This is where sleep starts to come easier. When the mind stops pushing against the pattern, the tension drains out. The questions lose urgency. The analysis softens into observation. Observation softens into familiarity. The year turns. The ritual plays out. The structure remains untouched. The loop completes itself without effort. Nothing is demanded. Nothing is negotiated. Nothing changes. And that is the quiet stability of it. The system hums along at the same frequency year after year, episode after episode. The reset does not fail, it succeeds perfectly. The year moves forward on paper. The celebration marks the moment. The roles resume their positions. The rhythm continues. And the year moves forward without going anywhere, which is where the contradiction finally becomes impossible to ignore. Because time cannot do both things at once. It cannot advance and remain still in the same moment. One of those ideas has to give. Either Bikini Bottom is moving forward or it is not. Both of these things cannot be true at the same time. This is not an emotional statement. It is a structural one. If time progresses, then something must accumulate. Change must stack. Consequences must carry weight from one moment to the next. But if nothing accumulates, if nothing ever becomes different, then time is not moving in any meaningful way. It is only repeating itself. The show quietly asks you to accept both ideas at once. It shows you New Year's, countdowns, celebrations that imply motion, and then it shows you a world that resets perfectly back to its starting position. The same jobs, the same relationships, the same emotional distances. The contradiction is never addressed directly. It is simply normalized. You feel this tension as an adult because your brain no longer lets contradictions pass unnoticed. As a kid, the reset felt comforting. As an adult, it feels illogical. You start asking questions the show never answers. What exactly changed? What exactly moved? What exactly is new? When you slow the thought down, it becomes very simple. Either time works here or it does not. If it works, then the characters are trapped in a cycle of failure so complete that nothing they experience ever matters. Every lesson is erased. Every effort dissolves. Growth is impossible. Not because they do not try, but because time refuses to carry it forward. But if time does not work, then the celebrations themselves become a kind of illusion, a ritual designed to mimic progress without requiring it. The calendar flips, but nothing underneath responds. The new year exists only as a symbol, not as a passage. This is the binary trap. There is no third option. Either the system is broken or the people inside it are, and the show never forces you to choose. It lets both explanations sit side by side, quietly unresolved. That unresolved state is important. It lowers resistance. You are not asked to judge. You are not asked to accuse. You are only asked to notice that something here does not add up. The calm tone makes the logic feel gentle instead of threatening. You recognize this feeling from real life. Systems that insist everything is moving forward while your experience tells you it is not. Promotions that exist on paper. Progress that exists in language. Time that passes without producing change. The contradiction becomes background noise until someone points it out. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every new year in Bikini Bottom carries the same quiet question. What exactly is being renewed? What exactly is advancing? The repetition sharpens the paradox instead of resolving it. This is where the logic tightens. If time is progressing, then stagnation is a condition imposed on the characters. If time is not progressing, then the celebration is a performance designed to soothe discomfort. Either way, the system cannot be innocent. The key here is that you are not required to decide which explanation is true. The trap works without resolution. It only needs you to accept that both cannot coexist peacefully. One of them is lying. That realization does not create panic. It creates stillness. The mind stops arguing and starts observing. The contradiction sits there, calm and unchallenged, like a thought you are allowed to set down instead of carry. Time is either moving or it is not. Progress is either happening or it is not. The show keeps presenting both ideas over and over, trusting that eventually you will feel the strain between them. Both of these things can't be true at the same time, so the first possibility is the gentler one to sit with. What if time itself is broken here? Not slow, not misunderstood. Broken. Looping without permission, repeating the same stretch of moments the way a damaged recording skips back to the same frame. If that is the case, then nothing in Bikini Bottom is choosing to stay the same. They are being held there. In this version of the world, the characters are not failing to grow. They are confined. Every attempt at change gets caught in the same temporal net and pulled back to the beginning. Effort exists, desire exists, but time refuses to carry it forward. The system is not asking them to improve because improvement would require time to cooperate. This interpretation feels softer because it removes blame. SpongeBob is not naive. Squidward is not bitter. Patrick is not careless. They are all reacting normally to an abnormal environment. A place where yesterday bleeds into today so perfectly that the boundary disappears. You can imagine what that would feel like. Living with the sense that something should move but never does. Watching milestones arrive without impact. Feeling the calendar flip while your surroundings remain unchanged. That kind of environment would exhaust anyone, no matter how optimistic they were to begin with. If time is broken, then the new year is not a lie. It is a malfunctioning signal, a marker that is firing without effect. The system announces progression, but nothing responds. The celebration becomes a symptom rather than a deception. This framing offers relief because it explains stagnation without turning it into moral failure. No one is lazy here. No one lacks willpower. The path forward simply does not exist. The road ends in the same place it began. As an adult, this explanation resonates deeply. There are moments in life where effort feels disconnected from outcome, where time passes but conditions do not shift, where growth is attempted and then quietly undone by forces outside your control. Blaming yourself in those moments only adds weight. Externalizing the cause allows you to breathe. Bikini Bottom, under this lens, becomes a containment zone, a liminal space where progress is suspended. The characters move within it, but never out of it. Their routines are not habits chosen freely. They are responses to an environment that does not allow alternatives. This is why the tone slows here. There is no urgency when blame is removed. There is only acceptance. If time is broken, then struggling against it makes no sense. Endurance becomes rational. Adaptation becomes survival. The repetition in this world is not stubbornness, it is gravity. Everything falls back into the same position because the system is warped. The reset is not something the characters embrace, it is something that happens to them. In this reading, SpongeBob's optimism becomes a coping mechanism. Squidward's exhaustion becomes a natural response. The new year becomes a ritual that keeps everyone oriented inside a loop they did not design. Nothing here is choosing to stay small. Nothing is choosing to repeat. The conditions enforce it. Time itself is the warden, quietly resetting the environment before anything can. This ideal does not demand action. It offers understanding. It reframes stagnation as containment instead of flaw, and that reframing softens the edges of everything you have been holding. If time never moves, then no one here is choosing to stay, and that leaves the second possibility waiting quietly beside it. What if time is fine? What if it is working exactly the way it should? Moving forward, advancing normally, carrying days into weeks and weeks into years without any damage at all. If that is true, then the resets are not accidents, they are decisions, and the repetition is not imposed, it is maintained. This is the heavier thought, but it does not need to be delivered harshly. It can be observed gently. If time is functioning, then every return to baseline is a choice, even if it is an unconscious one. The system keeps rebuilding itself because everyone inside it participates. In this version of Bikini Bottom, nothing is broken. The calendar flips honestly. The years pass as they should, and yet everyone returns to the same roles, the same dynamics, the same emotional positions. Not because they're trapped, but because the loop feels safer than the unknown outside it. That safety matters. Change is not just movement. Change is risk. Growth requires uncertainty. It asks you to let go of familiar patterns before new ones are guaranteed. In a world like Bikini Bottom, repetition offers protection. The loop promises that nothing unexpected will happen. The cost of that promise is progress. This does not make the characters weak, it makes them human. SpongeBob chooses optimism because it keeps his world stable. Squidward chooses disengagement because resistance has never paid off. Mr. Krabs chooses exploitation because the system rewards it. Each choice reinforces the loop. No one has to coordinate. The repetition sustains itself. The new year, under this lens, becomes intentional theater, a ritual that acknowledges time passing while carefully preventing time from changing anything important. Everyone plays their part because the alternative feels heavier than the stagnation. You recognize this pattern in your own life. Staying in a job you have outgrown because it is predictable. Maintaining routines that no longer serve you because disruption feels dangerous. Repeating habits that numb discomfort instead of resolving it. Time moves, you move with it, but you do not move forward. This is not failure, it is adaptation. The system does not need to force compliance when familiarity does the work. Once repetition feels normal, deviation feels threatening. The loop becomes self-reinforcing. Each reset confirms that staying is easier than leaving. This is why the rhythm stays gentle here. There is no accusation, only observation. If time is working, then the repetition exists because it is being chosen, quietly, collectively, without discussion. The comfort of sameness outweighs the discomfort of growth. The new year becomes a moment of reassurance, a reminder that the structure is still intact, that nothing has slipped, that the roles remain available. The celebration is not denial, it is confirmation. This thought can feel uncomfortable at first. It suggests responsibility, not guilt, but participation. The idea that the loop continues because it is useful, because it protects people from risk even as it limits them. But there is also calm in naming this. Understanding choice does not require action. It only requires awareness. You are not asked to break the loop. You are not asked to judge it. You are only asked to notice how it sustains itself. Time passes. The reset arrives. Everyone resumes their position. The repetition feels familiar. The safety returns. If time is working, then nothing here is stuck by accident. The loop continues because it serves a purpose, even if that purpose is simply to keep everything from changing. And if time is working, then this is what they're choosing, which quietly brings one more variable into the picture. You. Not as blame, not as accusation, just as presence. Bikini Bottom continues because it is still being watched. The loop stays intact because it is familiar, and familiarity invites return. Every time you press play, the world stabilizes itself again. The jobs reset. The relationships fall back into place. The calendar flips without consequence. Observation becomes reinforcement. This is not a sinister idea, it is a gentle one. Stories survive when they are revisited. Worlds stay alive when they are remembered. Bikini Bottom does not need to move forward because it is preserved through attention. The act of watching becomes participation, even if it feels passive. Familiarity does the work quietly. You remember this feeling from the VHS era, rewinding the same tape, watching the same episodes on Saturday mornings. The comfort was not in surprise. It was in knowing exactly what would happen next. The repetition was the point. The stability felt safe. As an adult, that instinct does not disappear. It softens. It becomes background noise during long nights, comfort viewing, familiar voices, worlds that do not ask anything from you. Bikini Bottom offers that perfectly. Nothing progresses, nothing collapses, everything stays available. The system does not trap you, it welcomes you. Every time you return, the loop tightens just enough to hold its shape. The characters do not age because aging would break familiarity. The conflicts do not resolve because resolution would end the need to return. The new year arrives because it sounds like movement without requiring it. Watching sustains that balance. This is why the tone here stays calm. There is no guilt in this. Comfort is not a crime. Wanting something predictable in a chaotic world makes sense. Bikini Bottom offers a liminal space where nothing demands adaptation. You can rest inside it without consequence. The system responds to attention the way any long running story does. It stabilizes, it repeats what works. It keeps the loop intact because the loop is what is being sought, not consciously, not deliberately, but gently. You are not responsible for the structure. You are simply part of the feedback loop that keeps it alive. The familiarity reassures you. Your return reassures the world. The exchange is quiet and mutual. This is why the repetition never feels aggressive. It feels inviting. You know what you are getting. The predictability lowers anxiety. The sameness becomes a cushion. The loop does not demand belief. It only asks that you stay a little longer. When you watch, you confirm that the system still works, that the roles still make sense, that the reset still comforts. The world breathes easier because someone is there to receive it. Nothing here requires effort. You do not need to analyze. You do not need to intervene. Observation is enough. Presence is enough. The loop completes itself as long as it is seen. This realization does not need to be heavy. It can be soft, almost reassuring. The world is not frozen because it is broken. It is stable because it is familiar, and familiarity survives through attention. The system hums quietly in the background, repeating itself with precision. The calendar flips, the celebration happens, the reset settles in, and you are there, not changing it, not challenging it, just witnessing it. That witnessing is not passive, it is sustaining. The loop does not demand your energy. It does not ask you to decide anything. It simply continues, responding to the fact that someone is still there to see it. It keeps going because someone is still watching, and that is where the fourth loop finally locks into place. Because at this point, the question no longer needs an answer. Time might be broken, or time might be working perfectly. The system might be failing the characters, or the characters might be choosing the system. The binary remains open, balanced quietly in the background, and nothing actually requires you to resolve it. That is the important shift. Earlier, the contradiction asked for attention. It pulled at logic. It wanted to be understood. Now it softens. The edges blur. The mind realizes that choosing a side does not change the rhythm. The loop continues either way. If time is broken, then repetition is unavoidable. If time is fine, then repetition is preferred. Both paths lead to the same place, the same routines, the same roles, the same reset. The destination does not change, so the question loses urgency. This is where tension drains out of the analysis. The system does not collapse under contradiction. It absorbs it. The unanswered question becomes part of the background noise, like a clock you stop noticing once you fall asleep. The mind no longer pushes against it. It rests beside it. You do not need to decide who is at fault. You do not need to diagnose the system. You do not need to rescue the characters or escape the loop. The story does not ask that of you. It never did. Instead, it offers something quieter. Acceptance without explanation. Presence without pressure. The loop is what it is, and it functions whether you understand it or not. This is why the repetition starts to feel comforting again. Once the need to solve disappears, the pattern becomes predictable. Predictability lowers effort. Lower effort invites rest. The new year arrives. The celebration plays out. The reset settles in. Time appears to move. Nothing actually changes. And the system hums along, unbothered by the contradiction it carries. You can feel how gentle this becomes. There is no reveal waiting, no final answer hidden just out of reach. The binary trap is not a puzzle to solve. It is a shape to sit inside. As an adult, this feels familiar too. Some questions in life never resolve cleanly. Is the system broken, or are you just tired? Are things stagnant because you cannot change them, or because change feels too costly? Those questions linger, but eventually they stop demanding constant attention. You learn to live alongside them. Bikini Bottom models that perfectly. The world does not panic over its own paradox. It repeats anyway. The characters continue. The viewer returns. The loop sustains itself without explanation. This is where analysis fades into observation. Observation fades into familiarity. Familiarity fades into comfort. The mind stops pulling at the thread because it realizes the fabric will not unravel. Nothing is wrong enough to fix. Nothing is right enough to celebrate. Everything is stable enough to continue. The system does not need clarity to function. It only needs repetition. And repetition is abundant. So the binary remains open. Time might be broken. Time might be fine. The answer does not change the outcome. The loop persists either way. That realization feels like setting something down after holding it for too long. The mental grip loosens, the question drifts into the background, the rhythm takes over again. You do not have to choose a side, you do not have to decide what is true. The story keeps going without your input, the loop closes itself gently, without resolution, without demand. And in that quiet space, the contradiction stops feeling heavy. Maybe it never needed to be answered at all. And maybe it doesn't matter which one is true because there is nothing left that needs to be figured out. Everything that could be noticed has already been noticed. The patterns have been seen, the loops have been named, the contradictions have been held gently and then set down. There is no hidden answer waiting deeper in the system. No final explanation that will suddenly make everything resolve. What you have already observed is enough. This is where interpretation naturally ends. Not because it failed, but because it finished its work. You do not need to keep turning the idea over in your mind. You do not need to test it from another angle. The world of Bikini Bottom does not reveal more detail the harder you look at it. It reveals the same shape again and again, calm and consistent. Once that shape is familiar, analysis becomes unnecessary. The new year arrives, the celebration happens, the reset follows. You already know this. You have known it for a while now. Nothing untouched new will be uncovered by repeating the question. This is where the thinking can soften. You can let the idea rest without solving it. You can allow the loop to exist without demanding a verdict. The system does not need to be diagnosed anymore. It does not need to be defended or criticized. It simply is. As an adult, this moment feels rare. Most systems demand constant interpretation, constant optimization, constant explanation. Here, that pressure fades. The story does not ask you to improve it. It does not ask you to fix it. It does not ask you to carry the weight of understanding any further. The observation phase is complete. You have seen how time behaves here. You have seen how memory works. You have seen how celebration replaces change. You have seen how awareness feels inside a repetition. Nothing else needs to be added. Nothing else needs to be concluded. This is where the language simplifies because complexity is no longer useful. Simple statements are enough now. The year turns, the world stays still. The loop continues, the quiet returns. There is no urgency left in these words. They do not need to persuade you. They only need to remind you that the work is done. You might notice your mind wanting to reach for another question. That is habit. You can let it pass. There is nothing else to chase here. No revelation hiding behind the next thought. No solution that requires effort. The story has already given you everything it intends to give. This is where permission enters. Permission to stop analyzing. Permission to stop holding the structure together in your head. Permission to let familiarity replace curiosity. You do not need to stay alert. You do not need to stay sharp. You are allowed to rest inside what you already understand. The repetition that once demanded attention now offers comfort. The same ideas return, but they no longer carry weight. They drift through the mind and settle without friction. You have seen enough of this world to know how it works. You have recognized the loop. You have felt its rhythm. There is nothing left to extract from it. So you can let the thoughts slow down now. Let them become fewer. Let them become simpler. Let them fade into the background, the way the noise fades after the celebration ends. The calendar does what it always does. The world does what it always does. And you do not have to follow every step anymore. This is the end of interpretation. Not a conclusion, not a solution, just a quiet stopping point. The place where thinking naturally gives way to rest. You've already seen enough, which means you no longer have to keep looking. Bikini Bottom does not pause when your attention drifts away. It does not dim the lights or wait for a signal. It keeps moving in the quiet way it always has, running on routines that do not require witnesses. Streets empty themselves. Doors close. The sounds soften until they blend into the background hum of a place that knows how to exist without being observed. This world does not depend on you watching it to continue. The Krusty Krab opens and closes on schedule. The same tasks are completed. The same conversations repeat themselves in familiar tones. Nothing urgent happens. Nothing unexpected arrives. The system maintains itself with or without an audience, and there is a comfort in knowing that. You can imagine the streets late at night, long after the celebration has ended. No confetti, no countdown, just the steady presence of a place returning to its baseline. The ocean moves. The buildings stand, the routines reset without ceremony. Everything finds its position again. There is no pressure here, no demand to engage, no requirement to stay alert, Bikini Bottom does not need your focus to function. It is designed to loop on its own, quietly, reliably, like a machine that hums itself to sleep. This is where the burden lifts. You do not have to keep track of anything. You do not have to remember details or anticipate outcomes. The world will repeat itself whether you follow along or not. The repetition is stable enough to survive neglect. As an adult, this idea feels relieving. So much of life asks for constant attention, constant input, constant reaction. Bikini Bottom offers the opposite. It runs in the background. It does not escalate. It does not surprise. It does not demand decisions. The repetition becomes almost musical. The same notes played softly, the same pattern, looping without friction. The rhythm is slow enough to fade into the edges of awareness. You hear it, but you do not have to listen closely. This is how the world feels when urgency is removed. When observation becomes optional, the system does not collapse when ignored, it settles, it smooths itself out. It waits patiently for the next cycle, whether anyone is there to notice or not. You can let your attention loosen now. Let it drift in and out without consequence. The story does not advance, it does not retreat, it simply continues at the same pace, holding its shape. There is something reassuring about that steadiness, knowing that nothing will be missed, knowing that nothing important depends on your presence. The loop will still be there if you return. It will look the same, it will sound the same, it will feel familiar. This is why the sounds soften here, why the images blur slightly, why the world feels farther away. Bikini Bottom is still running, but it no longer needs to be held in focus. The celebration is over. The reset has settled. The routines are back in place. The system hums quietly, repeating itself without urgency or demand. You do not have to stay with it. You do not have to keep watching. The world is comfortable enough to exist on its own. It will keep going, even if you don't watch, and that is when the loop begins to feel different. Earlier, repetition felt heavy. It felt like something closing in, the same moments returning again and again, asking to be noticed, asking to be understood. But now, with no attention required, the repetition loses its edge. It stops feeling like confinement and starts feeling like motion. The loop does not disappear, it softens. The same patterns return, but they arrive more slowly. The same ideas pass through, but they do not demand interpretation. Words repeat, then repeat again until they blur into something less sharp, less urgent, more like background sound than signal. This is what happens when repetition is no longer resisted. Think about waves in the ocean. Each one looks similar. None of them need to be counted. They rise, they fall, and the rhythm itself becomes calming once you stop measuring it. Bikini Bottom settles into that same cadence, not static, not progressing, just moving gently within itself. The new year still arrives. The reset still happens. The routines still resume. But now those events do not feel like warnings. They feel like markers in a steady pattern. The loop is no longer something you are trapped inside. It is something you can rest alongside. This is where the pace slows noticeably. Thoughts stretch out. Sentences feel longer. The mind does not rush to the next conclusion because there is nowhere it needs to get to. The repetition does not hide anything anymore. It simply exists. Earlier, the loop felt like a question. Now it feels like a rhythm. You can let the same ideas pass by without holding on to them. Time may or may not be broken. Choice may or may not exist. The system may or may not be closed. Those thoughts can drift through the mind and drift out again without needing resolution. The repetition becomes familiar enough that it no longer asks for vigilance. This is how unease transforms into comfort. Not by changing the structure, but by changing your relationship to it. The loop does not tighten, it loosens. It becomes something predictable enough to fade into the background. As an adult, this feels like the moment when anxiety quiets down, when the question you have been worrying about loses its urgency, when you realize that thinking harder will not produce a different answer, and that realization brings relief instead of frustration. Bikini Bottom lives in that space permanently. The loop has always been there. The difference now is how it feels. The repetition is still exact, the roles are still fixed, the reset still works, but none of it presses against you anymore. The rhythm carries itself. Words repeat softly, ideas circle back without weight. The same observations return, but they arrive like echoes instead of alarms. The mind notices them, then lets them pass. There is no threat in that repetition now, no demand to escape it, no need to challenge it. The loop becomes a gentle motion, like rocking back and forth, steady and unhurried. This is where comfort settles in fully, when the structure no longer feels like something you're inside of, but something moving around you. The repetition becomes external. You are no longer caught in it. You are resting near it. The world continues. The cycle continues. The rhythm holds. Nothing new is introduced. Nothing old is taken away. The sameness becomes soft enough to fade into the edges of awareness. The loop is still the same. The system has not changed. The repetition has not stopped. It's the same, but softer now, and in that softness, the new year begins to ask for less. Imagine a new year that does not arrive with instructions. No goals pinned to it. No pressure folded into the moment. No quiet demand that you become someone else by morning. The calendar turns, but nothing is required of you when it does. This version of the new year does not ask for improvement. It does not want a list. It does not measure you against the past. It does not compare who you were to who you think you should be. It simply shows up briefly and then settles back into the same gentle rhythm. In Bikini Bottom, this kind of new year already exists. The celebration happens, but the expectations are thin. There is noise, but no evaluation. There is marking of time, but no demand to justify how it was spent. The moment passes without keeping score. That absence of demand is important. So much of adult life turns time into a test. Every year becomes a checkpoint. Every milestone becomes a question. Did you do enough? Did you grow enough? Did you change in the right direction? That pressure turns even quiet moments into obligations. It keeps the mind alert when it wants to rest. Here, that pressure dissolves. The new year, in this softened loop, does not look at you. It does not wait for a response. It does not need you to participate correctly. It exists without expectation, like a night that comes and goes whether you notice it or not. You can feel how calming that is. When nothing is asked, nothing can be failed. When there is no promise, there is nothing to break. The moment becomes safe because it does not require performance. This is where the tone shifts toward lullaby. The ideas become simpler. The words slow down. The new year is no longer a symbol of what should happen next. It becomes a quiet marker that passes through the background of a world that is already settled. You do not need to prepare for it. You do not need to reflect. You do not need to decide anything. The loop continues gently, and you are allowed to stay exactly where you are within it. Think about how rare that permission feels. To exist without improving, to be present without progressing, to rest inside familiarity without needing to justify it. Bikini Bottom offers that space, not as a lesson, but as an atmosphere. The celebration still happens, but it feels distant now, like something you can hear from another room. It does not pull you toward it. It does not demand your energy. It is just part of the environment, fading in and out. This is where emotional safety settles in. When the moment stops asking you to be different. When time passes without evaluating you. When the loop continues and you are not required to manage it. The new year becomes just another night, another soft transition, another gentle signal that does not carry consequence. And that is enough. You can let yourself be here, in this moment, in this repetition, without fixing it, without escaping it, without turning it into a goal. Nothing is expected of you now. The calendar can move, the world can repeat, the rhythm can hold, you do not have to respond. The mind relaxes when it realizes this. The body follows. Questions grow quieter. The need to do something with the moment fades away. This is a new year without demand, without pressure, without promise. Just presence. You are not behind. You are not early. You are not late. You are exactly where the loop allows you to be, and that is enough for now. You're allowed to just be here, and from that place, the season can begin to drift away. The new year does not need to be held anymore. It does not need to be examined or remembered. It can fade the way distant sound fades when you stop listening for it. The noise softens first. The edges blur. The moment loosens its grip and becomes background. Nothing important is happening now. The calendar has already turned. The celebration has already passed. Whatever meaning it was going to carry has finished carrying it. There is nothing left for you to do with it. You do not need to keep it awake in your mind. Thoughts begin to slow here, not because they are forced to, but because they no longer have a reason to hurry. The questions that once felt sharp lose their shape. The patterns that once demanded attention become familiar enough to fade. The loop continues, but it no longer presses against you. This is where repetition turns into rest. The same ideas return quietly. Time passes. The world repeats. The system hums. Each thought arrives softer than the last, like footsteps moving farther away down a hallway. You notice them, and then you don't. There is nothing left to resolve. You are not missing a final insight. There is no conclusion hiding just out of reach. The story has already settled into itself. The rhythm is steady. The environment is calm. The mind does not need to stay alert anymore. The season drifts away the way a day ends when no one is watching the clock. Light dims, sound lowers, awareness loosens. Everything that needed to be said has already been said, and everything that needed to be understood has already been understood enough. You can let go of the structure now. Let go of the analysis. Let go of the need to keep track of where you are in the loop. The loop will continue whether you follow it or not. Nothing is required. The world keeps moving at its gentle pace. Streets empty, routines reset, the same patterns settle back into place without noise or urgency. Bikini Bottom continues, quiet and familiar, doing what it always does. You do not have to stay with it. You can let the images blur. Let the ideas repeat without meaning. Let the rhythm carry itself. There is no task waiting for you at the end of this thought. No answer you need to remember. No promise you need to keep. The mind naturally drifts when there is nothing left to hold. The body follows. Breathing becomes easier. The distance between thoughts grows longer. Silence stretches comfortably between words. The new year is gone now, not in a dramatic way, but in the way things always leave when they were never meant to stay. It passes through and then dissolves back into routine, back into quiet, back into nothing that needs attention. This is where the story ends its work. The repetition becomes a soft hum. The ideas become echoes. The world becomes background. You are allowed to stop listening closely, allowed to stop thinking clearly, allowed to rest inside the familiarity without naming it. There is no final message here, no lesson to carry forward, just a gentle easing out of the season and into stillness. The loop does not need you anymore. The system does not need your awareness. The night is long enough to hold everything without effort. And now, you don't have to think about it anymore. If you enjoyed our video, subscribe to SpongeBob Sleep Stories for more videos like these.